Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Class's October webinar for an update on SuperStream for rollover and release authorities. My name is Sebastien Brennan. I recently started in a new role as product manager for Class, and I'm very pleased to welcome back Kevin Zhang, who's got an incredible wealth of knowledge on all things SuperStream, and is our technical compliance manager for Class. Welcome, Kevin.
Hi, everyone.
We've also got Alexis and Adam who are joining us for today's webinar, and they'll be here to answer questions throughout the webinar. So we ask that if you have any questions, if you could pop them into the Q&A box, and they'll try their best to answer them throughout today's presentation. As always, we'll share a copy of the Q&A, the presentation, and the recordings to all attendees, likely in the next week or so. And we will, of course, upload a copy to the webinar tab of our training and webinar portal, as we do with all of our webinars. It's just ticked over a year since SuperStream was first introduced for rollover and release authorities back on the 1st of October 2021. And it's fair to say there's been a few bumps along the way as the industry has adjusted to the new processes. But pleasingly, we are seeing a number of rejections and errors continue to fall. Class has played an advocacy role through our regular catch-ups with various industry stakeholders like the ATO and APRA funds, and we will continue to do so to make the process as smooth as possible. We've also continued to invest in improvements in Class SuperStream functionality, and we hope that in today's webinar, we'll be able to enhance your understanding of the key areas by sharing tips and showing you the process and the functionality in Class. For today's agenda, Kevin will start with a recap of the SuperStream and take you through some of the flow charts for each of the event types. I'll then take you through some of the features and improvements that we've recently introduced around SuperStream, and then we'll take you through a demo of the Class functionality to show and share some best practice tips. Finally, we'll finish up with covering frequently asked questions, as well as showing you some future enhancements that we're considering for SuperStream. So plenty to get through today. I'd like to kick things off with a poll question for the first poll question of the day. And what we want to know is, how confident do you feel about processing rollover and release authorities via SuperStream in Class? So we could ask you to select one of the following options. So we've got unfamiliar with the process, maybe you've never done it on Class before, limited understanding, you might have tried once or twice, slowly getting used to it, if you've tried quite a few times, or if you're feeling quite confident and you're here to try and capture some of those best practice processes that you want to implement for your business. So we'll give a couple more moments for people to select their answer. Thank you to all those who have. So a bit of a mixed bag. There's some of you who haven't really had much experience with the process at all in Class. A couple of you also saying you've got limited understanding, and then quite a few of you are slowly getting used to it, which is probably fair enough, given that we're 12 months down the track. Some of you saying quite confident about the process, which is good to see as well. So thank you for everyone who's participated in that poll. All right, I'm going to hand over to Kevin to take us through a recap of SuperStream. Thank you, Kevin.
Thanks, Sebastien. Good afternoon, everyone. I will probably start with recap of SuperStream with the recent benchmark report Class has produced. This is a snapshot of the SuperStream roll-ins and roll-outs with comparison to the manual process. So the period we compared was from 1st October 2021 to 30 June 2022, and with the same preceding financial year. Now, SuperStream for Salmon and Superone has been both controversial and beneficial. It is a double-edged sword, and time will tell if the efficiency gains from the electronic rollovers and digital release authorities will lead to more funds under management for Salmon and Super funds. Class data for the SuperStream hasn't had a significant effect on rollovers for FY22. Rover counts being less than the previous financial year, both in the number of rollovers and the dollar value. Now, I will also recap the legislation behind the SuperStreams. So the official start date for the legislation is covered for subsection 14.17 of the Superannuation Industry Supervision Regulation 94. The actual date is actually 31st March, but obviously in order to implement the new measures, both regulators and APRA and ATO has managed to extend a provisional period, effectively 6 months. So officially for all funds to be on board to comply with the new SuperStream requirements is from 1st October 2021. If you want to ask which section actually cover these measures, it's under Division 6.5 of the SIS regulations. So for to receive electronically Rover transfer requests, it's under 6.33B. To validate member details, it's 6.33D. Now, when you transfer money out of to a self-managed super fund, use electronic service upheld by the ATO to verify certain information. That's under 6.33E. Finally, there is a requirement to complete the rollover or transfer transaction within 3 business days. That's under 6.34A. Now, obviously, given there are a lot of teething issues with SuperStream, the ATO has not mandated and make those 3-day compliance requirements yet. Now, the next slide, I will cover what's including the SuperStream measures. Basically, all kinds of rollovers, basically transaction between a self-managed super fund, either from an APRA fund or another self-managed super fund, contributions both for APRA and self-managed super funds, release authorities, again cover both APRA and self-managed super fund. So these are the following release authority transaction covered by the new SuperStream measures, particularly the excess concessional, non-concessional, and Div 293 are probably the most popular release authority will be applicable to self-managed super funds. There are noticeable some exclusions. Obviously, if one of the transferring fund is a non-regulated, non-compliant super fund, you cannot use SuperStream to do Rover Ls and Rover-ins. In specie, Rovers are specifically excluded from SuperStream measures. Internal transfers, particularly for self-managed super fund, such as contribution split, will be excluded from SuperStream. Family law settlement. And finally, anything to do with amendments and cancellations of a Rover, they are deliberately excluded from SuperStream as well. The next page, I want to show you the current register of the self-managed super fund messaging providers. There is temporary exemptions where ATO allows some self-managed super funds currently does not have a proper electronic service address that can receive rovings and release authorities to continue use that address ESA and continue to process release authorities and rovers by paper. Our understanding is that temporary measure will be withdrawn very, very soon. As you can see, even though they have about a dozen registers, ESA providers that support contributions, there are only 6 commercial providers in the market support both contributions and Rover release authority. 3 of them are related to software providers, and Class being one of them. The other 2, so Clear Super, they actually have an alternative solution called Worker, which is the last one in the list. Australian Post being the second one, are the 2 commercial providers currently support Rover and release authority, but both you have to, there's fees attached to in order to use their services. For Class, if you're currently using Class Super, there's no charge at all to using Class ESA, which is SMS data flow. Now, if you do have clients using those ESAs that only support contributions, for example, Macquarie Bank one is very popular one. You need to notify those clients to update with the class 1 in order to release to do digital release authorities or electronic SuperStream rollovers. Okay, the next part I will go through the flows of SuperStream. Now, before I start, I put some acronyms or terminology that you may or may not be familiar with. And this is just for your reference. Some of them I will actually cover in the flowcharts in a bit more details. Some of the definition for those type of descriptions and acronyms are actually covering the last webinar. But let's actually go have a look at the flow first. So this is rollover transactions. So what I did here is I put all the relevant parties involved in the rollover transaction on the top. So you have your members, you have transferring fund. Basically, that's the fund that roll the money out to the receiving fund. There's a bank linked to the transferring fund. And the receiving fund, there's also a bank linked to the receiving fund. And ATO being the regulator in the middle, that actually act a very important role. Now, with rollover transaction, currently there are 3 ways you can actually trigger rollover. The easiest one is that member approach the transferring fund and initiate rollover from the transferring fund. The most common example, they approach the upper fund, wanted to roll the money to a self-managed super fund. The second method is actually the new method introduced under this new measure. This is whereby the member can actually approaching, for example, the self-managed super fund, which is a receiving fund, to initiate a rollover request. And this initial rollover request will be sent to the transferring fund, and often being the upper fund. And the third option is the member can actually log into MyGov, online service for individuals, and basically do an initial rollover, or what we call a super consolidation. Now, that's actually processed by the ATO process. Now, it depends which method you choose. So for method 2 and method 3, there will be message received either from the receiving fund or from the ATO. So from the receiving fund is what we call an initial rollover request. Now, the transferring fund, once they receive the message, they can either reject, and then you will get the initial rollover error response, or they're happy with the information, but the next step is they need to validate the message. And basically, in order to check whether the receiving fund is legitimate and the member belongs to the fund, they need to validate against the ATO services. To support this, ATO built 2 additional services in addition to existing upper regulator services, this being self-managed super fund member tick. This is the service where they can verify with the member details, the TFM, name, address, and whether they belong to the super fund. The second one is the self-managed super fund verification service. Very similar. This is verify the fund is compliant and regulated with correct ABN, ESA, bank account details. Now, once those messages being validated, then the final step the transferring fund will do is converting the initial rollover request to a rollover transaction request. Notably, for ATO side of transaction, they will send the electronic portability form. Now, the difference between IRR and electronic portability form is that IRR, you can do a partial rollover, whereas EPF is always whole balance. The other difference is that because it's coming from the ATO, so ATO already done their homework and checked the receiving fund details. So there's no need for ATO to revalidate their services against either member tick or self-managed super fund verification services. Again, if there's errors initially, then you will get initial rollover response. Now, finally, if the transferring fund is happy with all those requests and validate against ATO services, they will send this Rover transaction request to the receiving fund. And at the same time, they need to initiate the payment. So they will do the payment request. The payment can only be made from the bank of the transferring fund to the bank of receiving fund via electronic fund transfer. There are no other mechanics that are allowed under SuperStream measures that support additional payment methods. Check, BPay, all these are not supported. Now, once the receiving fund receive this message plus with the payment, they're happy with the information, they will confirm it, and you will get a Rover transaction outcome request. Now, if there are errors associated with this, they are also part of the Rover transaction request, but the receiving fund need to refund the money back to the settlement, back to the transferring fund. Over to the next page, I will cover briefly the release authority process. It's very similar to the Rover transaction process, but much simpler. So if a member wants to make election to ask for the settlement fund to release the money to pay the either excess concessional, non-concessional, or Div 2/3 tax, they will make that election by the ATO. ATO will issue the release authority electronically to the transferring fund. So you no longer will able to receive the release authority by paper. Now, if there are errors, the transferring fund can reject those release authority, and you will get the release authority error response message back to the ATO. Now, if the transferring fund, being the self-managed fund, are happy with everything that coming from the ATO, then it's very, very important they need to make the payment, coordinating with the trustee member to make the payment, transfer the money to the, usually will be the Reserve Bank of Australia bank details, and using the payment reference number coming from the release authority, and then confirming the payment at the same process. Once, so ATO will automatically trigger release authority statement outcome response. If there are errors, you will get the refund process as well. Now I'll pass back to Sebastien to cover the recent features.
Thank you, Kevin. Look, I just want to share some of the key features that we've introduced recently to enhance the SuperStream functionality in class. And for some of these, I'll go into a little bit more detail in later slides to cover off why we've implemented and what these features actually do. But at a high level, the first one is around resolving duplicate ABN issues. So that's if you've got more than one fund in class with the same ABN. We've introduced Conversation ID, which is a unique reference that allows you to communicate with other parties like the ATO and other fund about a specific message that you may be trying to troubleshoot. We've introduced a fit to date button in the match transaction screen, and just in this week, we've updated the audit trail for that fit to date in the browse events screen. We've introduced color coding for our statuses in the rollover and release authority console, as well as a tooltip. We've also enhanced the tax agent error messages. So if you're trying to initiate a rollover and there is an issue with your tax agent setup, or the tax agent isn't the correct tax agent for that particular fund, then the enhanced error message will help you troubleshoot that. And the final one is around supporting foreign member addresses. So as I mentioned, I'm going to go into a little bit more detail for some of these. So the first one is around resolving duplicate ABN issues. So SuperStream messages can only be received by one fund in class. And what has arisen for some of these funds, and this can occur, for example, if you've got an accountant who has a fund, that client moves to another accountant who's also on class. And so now you've got the fund that's in class with the same ABN. And so if that's the case, prior to this month, October 2022, those messages would be automatically rejected because there was a duplicate. And so what we've done is from this month, we'll no longer automatically reject those messages. We've created a new internal tool that will allow support team to identify and select the correct fund to receive those messages. That may require us to communicate with you just to establish who is the correct party to send that message to. So the benefit of these changes is that there's going to be fewer rejection of SuperStream messages, and our team will be proactively reaching out to you to determine which fund we need to be showing that SuperStream message for. So the second one, the conversation ID, if you look on the right-hand side on that screenshot, that's what it looks like. So it's a very long alphanumerical address that is unique to that message. And so the whole purpose of adding a conversation ID is that it's visible for statuses when you're waiting on the other party. So for rollover in, that's the request sent status. For rollover out, waiting on confirmation from receiving a fund, and for release authority, waiting on confirmation from ATO. So the conversation ID allows you to use that particular address to specifically identify the message for the other party when you're dealing with them. The fit to date functionality was introduced recently. So for a rollover and release authority business event, the date that is used is the date that the payment is confirmed, or that message is indicated in SuperStream. And so the issue that was arising is that if you confirmed payment, but then you didn't actually make the payment on the same day, then you would have an issue where the dates for the cash event and the business event did not match. And where this was particularly pronounced was if the cash date and the business event date occurred on different financial year. That caused issues for how the rollover was accounted for. So we've introduced a fit to date button. It does appear in the match transaction screen. So what happens is if you select the cash, you select the business event, there will be a fit to date button that appears at the bottom and you can match them off. What the fit to date button will do is it will use the cash date rather than the business event date. So the business event date will be overridden. In terms of the audit trail, so I mentioned we made a change in the last release. So what it will say now is that the business event was created by SuperStream, but it was modified by fit to date. So previously it was showing any of those modified event as the user's email. So now it says SuperStream, but modified fit to date. So benefits here are to enhance the audit trail, and as I mentioned before, to avoid issues, particularly around that financial year end boundary. The color-coded statuses. So we've introduced 3 colors in the rollover and release authority console, and we'll touch on that in a little bit more detail when we go through the demo. But what we're trying to do here is make it easier for you to understand when do you need to do something and when are you okay to wait on the other party or when the message is complete. So green means that no action is required from you. So green will be completed statuses as well as statuses that have been rejected on the class side. So basically you're saying there's an issue, but it's for the other party to fix, potentially with a new message later on. So you don't need to do any action. Orange is the one we really want you to be focusing on. Orange means that there is an action required, that the message is still in progress. We have noticed quite a lot of businesses directing their trustees, for example, to make a payment, but then forgetting to confirm that payment in the console. That is very important because the auditors are really going to be looking for that complete status at the end of the year when they're reviewing SuperStream. So anything in orange, you need to action, whether it be with class or it might still be with the other party, be the ATO, the APRA fund or another SMSF, that needs to confirm the message back. And red means that there's a rejection by the third party, so the ATO, the APRA fund, or the other SMSF, or there's an error that's being created on the class side which you need to address. So red means you need to do something to fix it. And often that'll mean restarting with a new message. So the other thing we've introduced here is a tooltip. So you'll see the eye that's next to the status. If you hover over the eye, that will show you information, a box to pop out with what that status means, so you have a better understanding of what you need to do. So we're hoping that with the color coding, it'll make it easier for you to know which messages require your attention, and also with the tooltip that we're adding for each status, you'll have a better understanding of what the status means. We know there's quite a lot of statuses. They all have slightly different meanings, so we're hoping that this will make it easier for you to use. All right, we're going to switch our attention back to the class app and take you through a couple of screens to go through some best practice tips. So I'd like to start with a user guide page, and if you attended the webinar last year, this might be familiar with you. We did at the time go through this part of the checklist. We've added another part to it around tax agent setup. The reason I want to cover it off today is because it is so important. A lot of the errors that we still do find, you can actually avoid by making sure you go through this checklist. So I really encourage you to use this. For those who are unfamiliar, for those who have never done the process in class, it's a good thing to guide you as you're starting out. For those who are quite familiar, especially if you do have a new fund or if you encounter an issue, this is the first point of call to see if you can troubleshoot it. So let's go through the two sections. So the first section is around tax agent setup. Now, most of you have set up your tax agent to lodge via SBR on class, either because you're lodging the annual return or you've set it up for rollover and release authority. So I'm not going to show you how to set that up today. But if you do need any help, there's certainly some articles in our user guide, or you can reach out to our support team. But what I do want to cover off on situations where you may have set up your tax agent, but you still haven't quite linked the correct tax agent, or there's issues with how you've linked the tax agent. So if I just share that in a little bit more detail, if you go to a fund and you go to the fund dashboard, which you can access from here, the first thing I'd like you to look at if you have a new fund or a fund that you're having issues with is check which tax agent is linked in the relationship box. Some of you will have a tax agent that is set as a default at the business level, and that means that any new fund that's added will have that tax agent. But that's not always the case, because some of you may have multiple tax agents and you may prefer not to have a default and set it individually. So you do need to make sure you've got a tax agent that's linked here. The second thing, and in this particular example I wanted to show you here, where you have an individual tax agent as well as an organisation tax agent. And this can cause issues as well at times. Now, it's okay to have both an individual and an organisation tax agent linked to the fund. And you may want to do that for reasons of reporting, having some of your merged fields pre-filled, and that's fine. But what's very important is if you do that, you do need to make sure that the credentials match, as in the credentials for the tax agent organisation match the credentials for the tax agent individual. And by that, what I mean is the software ID. So if you go to a contact at a business level, you've got the ABN needs to be the same. And under roles, you've got the tax agent number needs to be the same. And the software ID, which you can view, needs to be the same as well. So if you have an individual and an organisation, make sure the credentials match. Otherwise, it will create errors for you. So the other part of the checklist I'd like to touch on is what to do. And this is particularly relevant for a new fund or if you're going through this process for the first time. So make sure that the SMSF has a valid ABN. For those who are adding a new fund, obviously one of the first things you want to do is to complete a rollover in. So what we're suggesting here is you do need to wait until you've got, until the fund has a complying registered status. So check Superfund Lookup. It may take a few days for that to appear after the ABN registration. So you won't be able to initiate any rollovers until that's come through. The next part, again, very important, and we've spelt out, these are the fields that must match on the ATO to what's in class. And equally, what's in the other fund if you're dealing with a rollover. So the member's first name, the member's surname, the member's TFN, the member's address, and the member's date of birth. So if you have an issue where some of the details don't match, you really need to be cross-checking what's in the ATO what's on class, and making sure those details match. For a fund, the other requirement is a bank account. That should be a unique bank account to the fund. Now, in the annual return on class, there is a question that we actually ask you about what is the bank account that's used for SuperStream. If you've never lodged a tax return, so a brand new fund, again, you haven't lodged a tax return, you want to initiate a rollover in, you need to go to the tax agent portal to identify and update what is that bank account that the fund is using for SuperStream. The third point is having a valid electronic service address. Now, as Kevin mentioned a bit earlier, if you want to use the functionality that we've built in class, you must be using class's electronic service address. So whilst we say a valid electronic service address, I'm going to say you really want to be using class's ESA, which is SMSF data flow. So the part in bold without any spaces, that is the address that you want to use, and you do need to update that again on the ATO if you haven't already. So this checklist, very important, the tax agent setup part, linking the correct tax agent to the fund, and also the checklist to complete for each fund. So let's now go through the second part, which is around notifications. Now I have jumped through here very quickly, but I'm just going to show you how I got here. So at the business level, if we go to settings, you go to notifications, that will take you to this particular landing page. Now, the first thing I'd like you to do is to check after this webinar, do you have anyone actually listed here as a contact in your notification screen? If you don't, then by default, we will be sending notifications, and by notifications, we mean emails, to all of the access controllers in a particular business. And they might not necessarily be the best people to receive those messages. So it's a good idea, if you haven't got any contact in here, come in here and add recipients. Now, in terms of how you add a recipient, you are basically selecting a contact that already exists in the business contacts. So I can't create a new contact from here. I have to go to the contact screen, business level, if they are not already a contact in class. You can't add your trustees or your members to this, and we really don't recommend you add them as members, also as contacts, so that they receive notification. This is a tool that is for you, for your users of the class app to receive notifications. And so what happens is if you type in a particular name, if they exist in class as a contact, then you can select them. If you need to update the email address, you'll need to do that back in contacts. Another question we get here is, can I restrict by brand if I have a user that only has access to a particular brand? At the moment, you can't. However, if a user is restricted to a brand and there is a notification for a fund that they don't have access to, they will receive the email, but in the email, there'll be a link to click to access that particular message. From there, they will not be able to access it. So they will receive notification, but they're not actually going to be able to access that particular message or that fund. The final point I want to make here is around tailoring your messages. So I've seen a lot of businesses where they've just got contacts receiving all notifications for all types of statuses. And that may not necessarily be the most relevant for all those particular contacts. What you may want to do is to say, okay, who is a user of class that may actually need to action the statuses on class? And the ones I've selected here, release authority request received, rollover in unmatched, or rollover payment request received, are the ones where you actually need to click something in the rollover and release authority console in class. So these three statuses are ones you may want to give to people who are more processing on a day-to-day basis. Someone who's a manager or a partner may be more interested in knowing about errors or when the status is complete. So consider tailoring your notifications for what works best for you. Okay, I'm going to now jump into the rollover and release authority console. So back at business level, we have a shortcut that's available here. I'm just going to show you very quickly some of the key functionality, and then I'm going to hand over to Kevin to take you through some of the workflows. So on the left-hand side, as I mentioned, we do have statuses that are now color-coded. and they're appearing there. So you've got red, green, and orange. And if I hover over the tooltip, that's where I'm going to see what I need to do with a particular status. So we've got the ability to search for statuses by fund name or member name. By default, we will show you the current financial year worth of status. Now, it's still important to note that even though we're showing current financial year, you can still access all statuses by clicking on this blank at the top. And you really do want to make sure that statuses or messages from the prior financial year have got to a point where they're finalized. So if there's anything that's on orange for that prior financial year, we really encourage you to go back and action those. And finally, you do have the ability to specify a particular status that you may want to review. So I can, for example, look at all my unmatched statuses. And in this example for a rollover in, these will be the ones I would need to action on class. So I'm going to hand over to Kevin now, and Kevin's going to take us through a couple of examples of initiating some rollovers. So Kevin, hand over to you.
Thanks, Sebastien.
Thank you.
I will cover some of the common related transactions in relation to rollover and release authority. Let's start with a rover out. The first step, you need to select the fund. Oh, before you do a rover out, I do need to recommend people, depends the nature of the rover out. Obviously, if you do a full rover out, you should run a period update to the day before the transactions. If it's partial rollover, or in relation to a release authority, if the fund has enough money to make the payment, then period update is not required. But for this exercise, I just going, even though I'm doing a partial rollover, but I do want to illustrate the importance of running a period update. And the reason you run period update is to work out the member's exact balance the day before the rollover. So I'm doing it the day before. So today is T-1. Rover out. Process. Okay, once the period update is run, let's go through our rover out request. You select the fund. The ABN number of the fund should bring up automatically. There are multiple members of the fund. Now, if I select a member, for example, Jerry, he doesn't have any balance. You automatically will see red across against him. Okay, and it will tell you the period update has been run. In this case, I'm rolled to another self-managed super fund. Let me just bring up the other fund's detail. BSP number and account number. Account name, I'll make the same as the fund name. Electronic service address. Noticeably, we recently added 2 new ones. So one is the BGL Simple Fund 360, and the other one is Worker SMSF. Those are the ESAs currently support Rover release authority transactions. I'm doing a partial, and let's say I'll do 300,000. It's not a death Rover benefit, so you don't need to tick.
All right, so just a quick recap. Apologies, we weren't able to show the next part of that confirming the match transaction screen, but I just want to recap some of the key things to recall around best practices. So the first one is around linking tax agents. As I mentioned before, make sure you've selected the right tax agent for a particular fund. And if you do have multiple tax agents, as in the individual and the organization, make sure the credentials do match off. When you're setting up your notifications, it's a good idea to ensure you have, first of all, contacts in the notification screen, and secondly, making sure that you've got notifications, you consider tailoring them for the messages that you want certain people to receive. As Kevin said, for a rollover out, particularly if you've got a large balance, and the same applies for release authorities, but they tend to be lower balances. But if you do have a significant balance, then it is a really good idea to do a period update. If you're not sure what we mean by a significant balance, if you're in doubt, best to do a period update. But what we're talking about is generally around 70 or 80% of the balance that is being rolled out. So run that period update the day before. Make sure that you've matched the transactions off as well. And that way you'll be able to ensure that the correct balance is utilised. When it comes to the matching process, so what we ask you to do is to match off any payments in the match transaction screen. So take the business event, which will be created. And remember, the date that is used is the date that the payment is confirmed by the fund that is rolling the money out. Or the date that the payment is made, confirmed for a release authority. So you do need to match the business event to the cash event before you go and confirm that that payment was received, for example, on the rollover and release authority console. In particular, I've highlighted the three types of statuses for the different event types that we really do encourage you to keep an eye on, and that's for a rollover out and release authority, it's the request received status. So that means that you need to confirm that particular message and provide the details to trustees to make sure that they make that payment. For a rollover in, unmatched status means that the payment was made, message has been sent by the transferring fund, and you need to confirm that that payment is received. So make sure you match it off in class first before you're confirming that payment. It does make it a little bit trickier for funds that don't have data feeds for those bank accounts. So if you don't have a data feed, you will need to confirm with a trustee and hope that when they tell you that they've made the payment on that day, that they really have made the payment. It might be a good idea in that situation to actually wait to confirm the message until they actually tell you, yes, I've confirmed, and potentially even send you a copy of that transaction. And the final tip there is just around your statuses, making sure you follow up all of those that are in orange, all of those that are in red. We can't emphasize this enough, that you really need to get to the point where you've got the complete status at the end. So in terms of the next part, I'm just going to go through and launch our second poll question of the day. So what we want to know is what are some of your biggest pain points around SuperStream for rollover and release authority at the moment? Now, we know that there are still quite a lot out there, and we've listed a couple of examples that we've encountered. So the first one is around electronic fund transfer limits. The additional requirements for APRA funds around verification, potentially requiring things like a certified copy of a bank statement. The third one's around understanding and troubleshooting errors. Then we've got understanding the workflow and understanding the different statuses, which we hope current release will help with. We've got understanding the ABN, duplicate ABN issue, or really resolving that. And then verifying tax and preservation components before you do a rollover out or release authority. So I'll end that poll. Thank you to all those, again, who've answered. And I'll share the results with you. So the number one is around understanding and troubleshooting errors. And we do have a section coming up where hopefully we can provide some information around those errors and how to troubleshoot them. The second one is around the APRA additional verification requirements. We know that that has been a big thing that's been discussed around the industry. As mentioned at the start, we certainly have been advocating to see if we can streamline processes amongst APRA funds. I think the frustration in particular has been that two APRA funds may not necessarily have the same process, but that's something that we need to work through. The electronic fund transfer limit, again, we know that has been discussed quite a lot. At the moment, what the ATO is suggesting is that you try to increase the transfer limit before you make a transfer, that you do need to make sure that there is only one transfer for each associated message. So if you can't increase the limit by a significant amount, you may have to split that into multiple messages. And then the last one on the list is their understanding the workflow and statuses and how they work. So thank you again for those who have responded to that poll question. And I'll take us through to the next section on FAQ. Kevin, did you want to jump into this now?
Yes, before I do that, I'll quickly will show back the demo part. Apologies for that. Let me share my screen. Okay, it looks like they did had a deployment inadvertently. So this is the same transaction I just processed. This is a Rover out. Let me see if hopefully it'll work this time. While it's waiting, so this is in relation to release authority. So if you receive release authority, in this case, you will see it will display the correct details, $105. And then let me just go to that fund. Now, it's very important, you need to instruct your trustees members to make the payment first. And let me just quickly check whether the payment has been made. And you can see the payment has been made and quoting the payment reference number that match with the details here. Okay, then what you do is just confirm the request. While it's doing this. So this is in relation to the Rover out I just did, and the $300,000 has gone through successfully. The message, sorry. Obviously, you need to, because it's a Rover out, you need to contact your trustees to prepare the transfer of the fund electronically for that $300,000, quoting that payment reference number. And once the payment's made, you come back to collect the payments. Okay. So this message I just confirmed, and it should generate the event in class that you can match off. And if I click auto match, here's the release authority event. Okay, it's matched off. Now, I'm just going to refresh the console and show you. So the status for $105 now changed to waiting confirmation from the ATO. And this is the request I sent through for the $300,000.
Let's jump into our FAQ section. Hand over to you, Kevin.
Thank you. Now, what I did here is I put down some of the common errors that you likely experience with Rover and release authority, including the one I show you just then. The first one is you often get this SuperGen reference number. So, and unable to verify self-managed super fund information. The reason you get this error message is often because one, the transferring fund or receiving fund sending the details to check the receiving fund failed the settlement and super fund verification services. It's often caused by the fact that the ABN number associated with settlement and super fund is non-compliant or not regulated, usually due to non-lodgement of the returns. Or the actual ABN number was entered incorrectly, and we see sometimes clients enter the ABN number of the company trustees instead of ABN number of settlement super fund. And third, and the most common one, is the financial institutions, the bank account that they entered was not correct, or the bank account was used for income tax and GS activity statement purposes, but it forgot to update for it to have for SuperStream purposes, i.e. receiving rollings and contributions, or the electronic service address is incorrect. So if you do encounter these type of errors, relodge your return if you've got overdue returns. Once the status of the fund become compliant, then you can start do SuperStream Rollovers. Or if you're missing ESA and bank account details, contact ATO and lodge this change of superannuation details with the ATO, then you can start the process again. The other one, very, very common, is the unable to verify settlement super fund member. Again, and this is because it failed the ATO super member tick services. So it's very, very important. So it's either the data in class does not match with the data with ATO or the data from the APRA funds. So it's very important you review the tax file number of all the members, where I've seen a lot of clients where the husband and wife, they got their tax file number one way around. Sometimes you go to the members and two members share the same tax file number. Member name, date of birth, let's say 3rd of August, 1980, and they put as 8th of March. So those very simple mistakes where previously may not be notified via the return process, but through SuperStream, you have to make sure those details match exactly. Otherwise, you get those errors. Again, if those errors are incorrect, particularly the errors with ATO details incorrect, you need to find out those and update accordingly. Then you can trigger the rollover process again, or release authority. Next one. Okay, this sum of error message will get quite common. Rollover process unsuccessful. Usually, the provider will actually provide a bit more information as to why the rollover process is incorrect. You need to find out, review the error message and reason for the rejections, and perhaps contact the other third party and to clarify what went wrong and see if you can address the problem before you can trigger again. The other one, very, very common, rollover could not be processed due to rules within superannuation entity. Contact superannuation entity for details. So this usually because there's some sort of rules prevent this rollover to be triggered. And we see a lot of time it happen with constitutionally protected funds, public sector offer funds, or defined benefit funds. So you do need to review the transferring fund structure. And again, if you're not sure, contact the third party, external party, and seek clarifications. The one, SuperGenGen.11, so ABM not known to the message provider. So a lot of time we see that happening. One of the parties enter the ABM actually does not belong to the super fund. So the ABM was actually in a company or other entity other than a super fund entity, and that's why you get this type of error message. The next one, please. SuperGenGen 12. So payment reference number cannot reconcile with a payment. So this is caused by receiving fund cannot match the data in the SuperStream messages with the payment reference number in the bank account. So it's very important. You need to make sure the payment has sent to the correct bank account, and the correct payment reference number has been utilized when you do the electronic fund transfer. And the other thing is very, very important. You can only use one payment reference number for one payment, okay? You cannot use multiple payments linked to the same payment reference number. we are aware that because of electronic fund transfer, most of the major banks have limits how much you can transfer. So in this case, you either increase the limits or do multiple Rover out in order to comply with the payment reference number requirements here. Member not found in supply information. Again, this is a very common errors. It's because member details provided in SuperStream Rollover requests cannot be matched with a member of the fund that is receiving this request. So again, you go back to review members, TFN, date of birth, name, address, and with the other funds details. The last one you saw just then, missing ABN number, software ID. So this is usually to do with tax agents setup, and you need to go back refer the SuperStream readiness checklist in order to correct the tax agent setup. Okay. Finally, there's some additional hints and tips to do with SuperStream rollover. In order to have much smoother transactions, we recommend that you do rollover from to initiate the Rover request from the upper funds. The reason being is you see that the workflow, it will bypass at least one step. Not only that, upper fund will do some of the upper funds will do their own checks, know your customers, anti-money laundering checks before you can roll the money out. So you bypass a lot of hassles if you do the initial Rover request. The same with self-managed super fund roll out. If it's roll out from between one self-managed super fund to another one, we also recommend to do it from the transferring fund. Now, when you have any errors, I always recommend that you troubleshoot from the self-managed super fund that's newly established or a member recently joined the fund. And often it's because the fund details, ESA bank account has not been updated with ATO, and that's why you couldn't do the rollover, or the member details was not updated. Now, we often get a lot of questions about, oh, we got this release authority. That's not actually issued correctly. Can we reject that, or can we make member payments? So rejecting release authority is not equivalent to a challenging or the assessment. The reason you get release authority is because the member or tax agent has accepted the assessment is correct. Instead of member paying the release authority, paying the assessment amount from their own pocket, they have elected as the fund to release the money to pay that amount. So it's not the equivalent of if we want to change the assessment. So if you want to change an assessment, you need to reject the release authority and do either amend the returns or lodge and contact ATO, lodge an assessment amendment. Now, we have a lot of questions about Rover benefit statements. So there's nothing changed around this area. So if you have processed a Rover out in class, you can continue to generate Rover statement and printing them out. So it's not a requirement for the fund to provide Rover statements to the upper funds. They are mainly for record keeping purposes where the trustee of the fund need to issue to the members. Now, if you do a Rover in, then it's the transferring fund's responsibility rather than the fund class to produce the Rover benefit statement. We also get a lot of requests about confirmation of the preservation and tax components. And obviously, when you process the events being the Rover in, Rover out, or lump sum payment, you can see the components in there. But if you want to see the components before you process a Rover out or lump sum payment in relation to release authority, we are aware of these shortcomings. And Sebastien will cover briefly in the next part. But if you really want to see it, you can process a manual event to see the components. Finally, if you accidentally click confirm payments without actually making the payments, or trigger Rover out requests, and with no intention actually transfer money to the receiving fund, then if you want to reverse those transactions, you must contact us, our support. making the request in writing. And make sure there's no money transferred to the receiving fund or paid to the ATO. If it's rolled to the upper funds, we recommend that you prefer the receiving fund to reject the message. However, if our current rule of thumb is roughly about 14 days, if it's past that message, you can make that request. Our operation team can update the status for that message to be rejected.
Thanks, Kevin. And look, apologies for going over time, everyone. I'll try and be very quick. And first of all, may I say, I'd just like to thank everyone who has popped in their feedback or questions in the Q&A. There are a lot of questions that have come through today, some suggestions and feedbacks on some of your frustrations, and there's certainly things we'll be looking at over the next period of time. If you don't have access to AHA, if you don't know what AHA is, it is our feedback portal. And we do have a specific subsection for SuperStream. So we'd love for you to register for AHA if you don't have access already. Alexis will pop that registration in the chat and we'll share it with you post-event. You've got 5 votes that you can allocate towards any idea, whether it's your idea or someone else's idea. I've listed a couple of the ideas that are in this category. They're certainly not all of them, but some of them around displaying the tax and preservation components before trying to complete rollover outs, allowing the receiving fund address to be inputted for rollover benefit statement, and better handling of rejection. So there are a couple of the ideas. We'd love to hear more of your feedback on AHA. So if you do have a couple of moments to register, or if you've already got access, pop your votes in there, and we'll have a look at that. A quick disclaimer about the information that we've covered off today. We have run out of time. Once again, thank you very much to all of you who have attended. As you can see, there's a lot of content around SuperStream. We'll certainly continue to do our best to continue to provide you with the understanding and the information so that you can handle this process as efficiently as possible. And we'll certainly make a copy of all the slides and the Q&A available to you in the next week or so.